continue our section, Operators Speak Out, on effective proportionate gambling regulation. I invite to the stage Mr. Alex Green. He's already there.
I'm already
Mr.
here.
Green.
One step ahead.
Alex Green is Vice President with ZEAL Network Games. The floor is yours. Oh, and please put your questions in Slido so we can ask them at the end of the section. Thank you.
Okay, right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be here in the United States of Germany. As I've just now found out as we should refer to it, I feel very much at home, given the terrible, dreary, rainy, cold weather outside. Very, very similar to London, which is where I flew in from yesterday. And it's really an honour to be here, actually, today. I've really enjoyed listening to all the speakers this morning. And it's an honour to be given this opportunity to talk about iGaming with so many industry experts. The topic is effective and proportionate gambling regulation. I appreciate it's quite late in the day now. I'm probably going to cover a lot of things that have already been mentioned. I've got quite a few things to read out, so I'm kind of hoping there's plenty of caffeine kind of running around everybody's veins at the moment as you listen to me. And I thought it'd be worth starting off by saying, actually, I think there's lots of really, really good things about iGaming regulation in Germany in comparison to other markets that I've seen, and I think this should absolutely be recognised and celebrated. But that said, and I think it's come through very clearly this morning, I also agree there are a huge number of opportunities here in Germany to evolve regulation without necessarily compromising regulatory objectives. And in my experience, the most effective regulatory frameworks are the ones that have all the interests of the key stakeholders, the regulator, the operators, and players alike. Firstly, I'd like to introduce ZEAL Network, if the slides work, for those who maybe don't know who we are. We were founded in 1999. We are a publicly listed company. We are the online lottery leader here in Germany. We have on average 1.5 million active monthly customers on our consumer-facing sites, Lotto24 and Tip24, and anyone that comes to those sites have the opportunity to play lotteries, but also games as well. And we are the trusted partner of state and charity lotteries alike. I don't know why I keep looking over here, because I've got the slide in front of me here. Maybe that's a better way of doing it. Within ZEAL, I'm the Vice President of Games. That's a business unit that has two kind of revenue verticals. One is our B2C business, where we have a license to operate virtual slot games under our consumer-facing brands, Lotto24 and Tip24. And then secondly, we also have a B2B business whereby we build digital games under the brand name ZEAL Instant Games, and we sell those games on our own sites, but also on the sites of other iGaming operators as well. Prior to joining ZEAL last year, I worked at the UK National Lottery for 20 years. So most of that time I was employed by previous operator Camelot before working for Allwyn for a few months last year, who of course took out operations of the UK National Lottery last year. And for most of my time at the National Lottery, I was heavily involved in the creation and marketing of games, eventually leading the games team who was responsible for games innovation and the commercial performance of games. And at the time, the National Lottery, all the brands generated annual billings of around 8 billion euros across Lotto, Euro Millions, Set for Life, scratch cards, and e-instants. And then I've also worked with a number of other lotteries. I spent some time working for a company called Camelot Global, now called Allwyn Lottery Solutions, and ultimately helping other lotteries in Europe and North America predominantly to generate strategies to help them responsibly grow revenues and player numbers by optimizing their games and optimizing their portfolios as well. And on my travels in all these comparable markets, I've seen lots and lots of different regulatory frameworks and different sorts of rule sets that operators were required to follow. And in my experience, the really, really effective ones are the ones that have that sweet spot in the middle, where they meet the needs, again, of the regulator, the operators, but also players. And I think we've spoken a bit today about, well, what is it that operators want? Well, ultimately, they want the opportunity to enter into markets They want the opportunity to grow markets. They want the opportunity to grow revenues, of course. The objectives of regulators are kind of fairly similar across different jurisdictions and even across parallel markets like lottery and iGaming. And here in Germany, the objectives of the GGL are very, very clear. Player protection, the protection of minors, licensing and regulation of operators and games, enforcement and market compliance, market monitoring and transparency, combating illegal gambling, and public education and consumer awareness. And again, I think it's very, very easy and straightforward to talk about regulatory objectives, operator objectives, but I think it's really, really important to think about the players, the people that ultimately buy these things that we sell. What are their needs? Some of them will be conscious needs, some of them will be unconscious needs. And like many operators at ZEAL, we talk to players and we talk to non-players pretty regularly, and we talk to them about what it is that they want, what they don't want, what do they think could be better, and what their barriers are to playing lottery or playing digital slots games. And in my opinion, I think there's a number of opportunities here in Germany to better meet the needs of players, but crucially without compromising regulatory objectives at the same time. And I thought I'd bring this to life by maybe talking about some of the things that we know our players want and some of the things that are just really common things from market to market when it comes to player needs. And this one comes up time and time again in any research group where you ever talk to a player. They will say, I want to win more often and I want to win more regularly, please. And of course, that isn't something that's particularly straightforward to do. However, I think it's fair to say that we've seen evidence today to suggest that maybe this is possible in Germany. We know what the black market is offering in terms of the comparison of the RTP. We know that the current tax regime is effectively preventing white market operators from setting higher RTP. So actually, in reality, there is potentially an opportunity here in Germany to allow players to win more regularly and actually win more money. Players want convenience. We live in a digital age where it is second nature for people to purchase all sorts of products and all sorts of services, either online or within apps at the kind of the tap of a button. And as you all know, we as consumers absolutely expect that the brands that we buy from to provide really slick, frictionless user journeys, should I say. But here in Germany, and I'll use lottery as an example, on our sites, players are required to use separate wallets when they buy slots games versus lottery. And the way that I thought about this was, can you imagine going to an online retailer and buying a pair of shoes and then having to use a completely separate wallet to buy a pair of trainers on the same digital site? That just wouldn't make sense. That is just not convenient. And I wondered whether the separate lottery and slots wallet requirement is actually benefiting players, or actually is there an unintended consequence that maybe it's actually reducing the likelihood of trial and someone potentially playing a digital slot game for the first time? Is a separate wallet requirement actually designed, therefore, potentially to protect players? In which case, I'd argue whether the best form of protecting someone is by actually restricting their ability to buy it in the first place. Should it be more about education and the active monitoring of players? So, for example, at ZEAL, we have fully automated algorithms running which monitor the whole player base, so not just the slots players, but also the lottery players as well, because ultimately we don't really mind what types of games people are playing on the site. We are concerned that they're actually playing them healthily. People want choice and they want innovation, because most player bases contain a real kind of diverse mix of different players, and they all have different preferences amongst themselves, but maybe different preferences for different days of the week. The choice of slots games in Germany looks pretty amazing on the face of it. So we know that some operators out there are currently offering over 1,500 different games to choose from. But if you look a little harder, then actually there's very little choice of playing digital instant games to win money if you're not a fan of slots games. In other markets, the variety of different types of digital games that markets offer is much wider. And I think the obvious one is something like e-instants. So these are digital games that offer players the chance to win money through different play mechanics that are not based on slots. But currently, regulation demands that online slots should mirror the offline slots market in order to be approved. But I would also say that sometimes the rules around mirroring slots in the offline market are not always clear. So for example, is the name enough, or is it more about the visual design? Is it about the play mechanic? Is it the prize structure? Is it the RTP? Or maybe it's a combination of all of these things. And I think we must consider whether it's a wise regulation to prevent white market operators from selling games like e-instants, particularly given that we know there's actually player demand for them, which is also not surprising because we know that e-instants are played and enjoyed by millions of people around the world. So maybe again, this rule is intended to protect players perhaps, but I would also challenge whether a greater variety of games, and especially the availability of softer types of games, does actually compromise player protection, or whether it actually might be the other way around, in fact. So ultimately, therefore, what is the point of that requirement? And then finally, even if you do love slots games, actually there's not a lot of choice, of course, when it comes to the stake per play. And we've already spoken about this today, given that the maximum price per spin is only €1, and therefore is it time that this rule was relaxed to enrich the experience for players who are willing to spend and can afford to spend more than €1 per spin, and again, simultaneously give white market operators the opportunity to become more competitive against the black market. I'd say that players typically want freshness. They want the regular introduction of new games. I know we've seen a slide today which maybe suggests that new games aren't driving people to sites in the first place through search. But I would say that players absolutely love to hear about new games. It's a really great way of generating news which you can send out on email communications. We know on our sites certainly that when we launch new products and we tag them up saying new, people will in fact give them a go. And almost every operator that I've worked with will always have a strategic game plan. So this is a plan that shows what games they're planning to launch, quite often kind of way out into the future, maybe 12, 18 months, because they have the confidence around the lead times associated with approval of those games. But of course, here in Germany, it's very, very difficult to predict what games can be launched and when because of the highly unpredictable approval time. So sometimes we have games approved within a few months, which is great, but other times we can be waiting for over a year for approval with no apparent reason for the delay. And I think these delays are potentially even harder for new studios because almost there's no proven equivalent game out there. And therefore, is it potentially time to consider a new model for approvals? Again, I know it's something that we've spoken about today, but how about instead of the GGL having to test every single game for every single provider time and time again, should the onus actually be on the operators, maybe the content providers, to produce evidence that games have been sufficiently tested, independently verified? GGL would, of course, still need to check that that evidence is there, but ultimately, this would take that requirement away, potentially free up lots of resources at GGL and simultaneously give operators and content providers, I think, more control and certainty when it comes to bringing new games into the market. And then I'd say last, certainly not least, is that players are looking for trust. They're looking for safety, they're looking for security. And many of today's speakers have already spoken about the black market and the impact that it's having on legal operators. But also we need to think about how the black market is actually affecting players, many of which perhaps unknowingly visiting black market sites, spending their money with unlicensed operators. And the unlicensed operators, quite frankly, very unlikely to have the same level of focus and commitment when it comes to player protection and security. That said, I think in Germany there's lots of things that are actually being done really well in the context of player protection. I think this Oasis tool, the National Gambling Self-Exclusion tool, I think is absolutely fantastic. I think it's such a really strong core responsible gaming tool. And I think there's lots of other markets that have got a lot to learn actually from that tool. I really, really think it's superb. And I think it's really clear to see here in Germany again that white market operators really do take ownership and drive forwards the black market agenda, the responsible gaming agenda. And this is absolutely critical because regulation is quite often about guardrails, creating the risk of Stuyverlast. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. In other words, impacting all types of players, whether the rule is actually useful or not. So for example, the separate wallet load requirement. But monitoring behavior on an individual player basis, differentiating between the player who is maybe playing healthily and the player who isn't, it's that individual basis that ultimately makes the difference between a trusted, safe, and healthy market. And therefore, in conclusion, in my experience, the most effective markets when it comes to regulation are the ones that have rules in place that simultaneously meet the requirements of the regulator, the operators, and the players alike. And if I can make a comment as a non-German observer, the GGL, the Bundesländer, the industry, I think we should all focus more so on pragmatism and what we actually want to achieve, be really, really clear about our overall intentions instead of what is the exact wording of a certain paragraph and its potential interpretation in a court proceeding. Sometimes Germany comes across potentially as a bit too verkauft, if I may say so, and therefore it does not always achieve what it's actually trying to set out to do. And my advice is to sometimes be a little bit less Immanuel Kant. I think there are some really, really great things here when it comes to regulation in Germany compared to other markets, and I think we've heard a lot about that today. But that said, it's also really, really clear that there's a huge number of opportunities to better meet the needs of players, but without compromising regulatory objectives. I really believe that the future of iGaming here in Germany is bright, but critically only if we have the right environment for growth. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Alex.